Hey everybody, this is Mark Sharp with Multifamily Mixtape. Thank you all for joining in today. With me, I have two guests I'm very excited to have on today. We have John Lowder, the Executive Director for the Apartment Association of North Carolina. And we also have Bryan Holladay, who is Administrator Management for AAW&C, which is the Apartment Association of Western North Carolina. And I have been working on getting these two gentlemen to join me for a podcast. They've been busy dealing with Hurricane Helene and all of the things that went along with that. So I just wanted to get them on to talk about the impact and resources and the involvement from the association level to help out as much as they possibly could. So Bryan, you are in Western North Carolina. I think that was the area most impacted from Hurricane Helene. Like, how's it going?
Yeah, well, thanks for having us. Appreciate being here. Talking about the impacts of the hurricane from the association side. We are in recovery mode in Western Carolina, and so we were in crisis mode for about 3 weeks. The Western Carolina hurricane situation was a little different than what you'd have in a typical coastal hurricane. So we had a lot of different issues that we typically hadn't had out there before. Unfortunately, North Carolina is very experienced in hurricanes, so they had the disaster teams kind of ready to go. But the first 3 weeks was crisis, and Western Carolina is a very large area geographically, but the association is mostly located in, the Asheville market. So the hurricane impacted a large area, and then our focus has just been the Asheville piece. So where we're at now is we have running water. It took some properties 3 weeks to get running water. The water is not potable, however. So what that means is that most areas are on a boil restriction, and depends how bad your water is on what that boil restriction is or not. So there's a lot of bottled water being shipped and taken to residents in Western Carolina, but they're very excited to no longer carry the bucket. So it was a very unique experience. John and I, when we went and visited properties, we talked all about. And it was like, people came in and they went to the front office and they would have their bucket and they would go to the pool and they would fill up their bucket so they could go back to use the bathroom, or they would, get gallons of water. And so the water situation was very unique out there. The tree situation, we had a lot of down trees, and that created a lot of chaos for the first couple of weeks. And then cell phones. The cell phones were not working. You would have communication was very hard to have, and that is now getting resolved. So we're kind of getting into that area. The biggest impact that's happening in the area is the tourism. Western Carolina, it's big for fall. With that, Biltmore House and Christmas, it's big for that season. And then also restaurants and breweries have a lot of that going on. So most of that needs water. Hotels require potable water to operate properly. Yep. Restaurants need potable water. So the tourism is taking a hit, and then that trickles down. So people don't have jobs. That impacts rents, and that impacts housing and relocation. And we also had a good number of units that were taken offline, either a building or an entire property had damage. So that's kind of a little recap of where we are and how we got there.
Wow. I'm glad you have water now, because I remember on our weekly calls that you told the story about residents bringing buckets to the office and grabbing pool water just so they could go back and use the bathroom. And, that it's just things in my head. Like you see the devastation on TV, but you see a small percentage. You see the trees, you see the roads washed away. You don't see necessarily the individuals affected and how they're affected. And going to the office to get pool water to use the toilets was not on my devastation bingo card. Like, it's just not something that I ever would have thought of. But So John, from a state level, before we started recording, we were talking off screen, and you had mentioned that Wilmington is no stranger to hurricanes, being out on the coast. So from a state level, from an association level, how is this different from the coastal hurricanes, and what impact can the state have on a local association? I think Bryan said it was the second smallest association in North Carolina. So how from a state level, how can you help? How can you assist?
Yeah, so it is a unique situation in Western North Carolina. So I was talking to Christy Rexroad, who was the executive director for the Wilmington Apartment Association, and I told her I feel kind of guilty that we've always assumed they can handle it out there when they have a hurricane, and I know that there have been times in the past that they could have used a little more state support. Who knows? But one of the things that happens just from an infrastructure standpoint, because they have dealt with it before, not specifically the association, but just the community there, I think there's an expectation and an understanding of what's going to happen. I think to your point about our member companies probably probably a more standard response. They're probably hey, we're gonna have to repair some roofs. We're probably gonna have to do we've got a punch list of things that we know we're probably gonna have to do.
Yeah.
There's also the accessibility part. You can easily, once the storm is gone, I think it's a little more straightforward to get to those affected areas than what's going on in Western. So what's happened with Western is you can't get to some of the affected areas, or couldn't get for quite a while. Bryan and I were on calls with the state where we were hearing that there's 100 bridges out and there's X number of roads that are inaccessible, and it was just a different type of problem, and it's a longer term. I think this recovery that Bryan's talking about, I think it's going to be a longer recovery in many respects than what we've seen in other parts of the state. So the mea culpa here is that I felt kind of guilty that our folks in Wilmington probably been left on their own. I think they would have asked us for help if they needed it, but it's just a different scale. And Bryan's right; it's a smaller association. He's the administrator there. He's on contract, but they are far more dependent on volunteer service than some other associations. So what we could do is come in and try to help backstop as much as we could with our staff time, with any resources that we could recruit, by being a conduit to other resources like the National Apartment Association or the state. What really is, I think, what really worked well was the coordination between the two organizations, because we may not know what's going on the ground, but if they can let us know, then we can help find resources and go to the state and see what we can do, organize the calls that you mentioned. It's not rocket science, and it's not anything other than making ourselves available and letting other folks in the industry help in any way that they can. So the last thing Bryan needed was to have to field 45 different phone calls from people who wanted to help and were willing to help, but he's got to help his members on the ground, right? He has to be there, and they are too busy to say, hey, I'm going to sit down and type up a list of things that I think we might need. They're in the midst of, they were literally, Bryan and I could, between the two of us, I'm sure we could probably share a dozen stories of what the on-site folks were doing to help their residents. I mean, truly heroic things that they were doing. They didn't have time to say, hey, by the way, could you come up here? Here's a list of the 47 things that we think would be really helpful for us to go out and get. That's what we could do, right? We could, because we're sitting in air conditioning with running water, and our lives are fine. We have the bandwidth to go out and get them the help they need. So truly, it's that simple. I mean, it really is not rocket science. It's just making yourselves available and listening and going out and getting help. And as you know, it's one of the great things about this industry. There was no shortage of people wanting to help. That's not the hard part. The hard part is figuring out is helping the folks who need the help get the help that they need, and not the help that they don't need, if that makes sense.
Right.
Well, let me bail John out. So this is John's first natural disaster as an agent. So when he says that we haven't done enough, he is speaking in the general we of. So he hasn't failed on the national disaster area. So it was a learning experience for both of us. And one of the big things that we learned right away was who has strengths where. And so we draw these imaginary lines for our associations, and like, okay, here's our boundaries. And we think they mean like this whole bunch of stuff. And then management companies, they draw different lines for their regions, and, suppliers draw different lines, and states and county, everyone draws different lines. And so, and we're so bound by these lines. So one of the things that John and I talked about real quick is like, hey, I'm communicating with managers, but you can communicate with the management companies. Like there's an old joke that the association is always the last to know. Yeah. Well, who's not the last to know is, the property manager, and actually most property managers at the very beginning didn't even have access to the property because they couldn't get there. So property manager is talking to someone on site, and they're relaying that up to a regional, and a regional is relaying that up to a vice president. And so John has access to all the vice presidents and everyone because it's a statewide association. It's like, we need to get your statewide here, and not just focus on, when you're saying, on the managers and the people on the ground who are trying to do this, but the people that are outside the market looking in, who want to know information and that can communicate the information back. So I think that was one of the things that we were, I don't want to say lucky, because we talked through it and we were like, this is what needs to be done. And it was a good strategy of like getting the right people to have these conversations. And so John's like, hey, this is what we did during COVID. We're just going to reinvent this thing and do it. And we had a ton of people on the call. And that is how we got a lot of information shared, because you're like, hey, here's what I'm hearing. And then we would hear that. And then from those, we'll be able to say, okay, here's the plan of things we're going to go and attack and figure out. And we were able to put a checklist together. And then John and I were able to get back later with some other things. So one of the nice things is Western Carolina, smaller association, 18,000 units. There's no staff. So it's not like, hey, I'm getting my membership person to do this, my social media person. It's just a small group of people. But the state does have more staff. And so it's like, hey, how can we help? And so their staff help make phone calls. One of the things we did in the beginning is we called all the properties, and which is really hard when telephones don't work.
Right. But you did it.
So, but to find out, like, do you have water? Do you have electricity? Where are you? And then we actually went in Google and created a Google map. And so we could see where they were in relation to that. And we'd have stuff. So if we needed to get information, and kind of shared that and figuring those pieces out. So John did a great job in his first national disasters.
Well, no, I think the most important part about that, honestly, was I don't know that I can say we learned it, but it was definitely highlighted, and that is the importance of information sharing, right? So we started, I hate to say that anything about COVID was positive, but I will say that, the fact that during COVID, we had all learned how to use Zoom, and hey, by the way, this is a pretty easy way to get people together on a regular basis to share information. And that's what so it wasn't a real leap to say, okay, why don't we do it for this situation? Invite anybody who wants to be on. We didn't say, hey, you have to be a member of A, W, and C, or you have to be a member of A and C. It's, if you've got a property in that area that's affected, we're not here to be a gatekeeper. We're here to help everybody recover as quickly as they can. And I think it really, really helped speed up that process of information sharing, because it was bi-directional. It was flowing up and flowing down. Some of the very early first calls that we had people who hadn't been able to contact anybody on their sites yet. And so They were asking, hey, if you've got somebody, if you're in contact with your manager and you're just on the street, could you have them go down and touch base and let me know that everything's okay? I mean, it was that basic. And then pretty quickly, once communication lines started opening up again, they were communicating up to us, hey, here's what we don't need. we've got plenty of the following, but we really still need water, or we really need, fill in the blank. And so the information part, I think, is always the most important. And Bryan, and so we're also very lucky in that one of our members had her husband was involved with the state's emergency response. There's this group called the Business Enterprise Operations Center. So it's the state's emergency managers. They have these regular daily meetings with people from private industry, and we're talking banks, we're talking, us, you name an industry. The grocery stores were on this call. That was a phenomenal resource for us to hear directly from the state. Here's what's going on. Here's that's how we knew about the roads and the bridges and everything else. Now, again, another mea culpa here. That member had offered up that connection very early on in this process, and we were in such crisis mode that it slipped. I missed it. Bryan, thank God, he said, you know what? I think Elizabeth told us about her husband is on this thing. Maybe we should connect with him. And Bryan connected with him, and he got us hooked up with this group. And that really probably was when we started cooking with gas in terms of getting the information we needed to share.
Yeah, it is interesting. Things we learned. We learned we were always 1 week behind. Like, we should have done that last week. And it was like the thing that we kept running against. Like, man, this is what but we adjusted. We got into those things, and that I think was the hard part. Like, you don't know what you know, and then when you start, oh yeah, this is a really good idea. We should have done this earlier and do that. So we're kind of always 1 week behind. So I'm really hoping we're not learning these things to redo them again in the future. But that was the interesting piece. The other thing that was really interesting that we learned real quick was that during a national disaster, like, all these regulations, all these rules change, there's all of these new things that go into place. And so what doesn't change is any of the housing rules. So we are bound by all the same housing rules that already existed before and after. And so that created a whole nother level of complications because, people started asking all these legal questions. We're like, well, wait, hang on. Nothing's changed. All fair housing still exists. All, habitability laws. Like, none of this has changed. And like, what does this mean? And we're like, it doesn't. And so, like, we kept giving really bad answers. It was like, you gotta go talk to your lawyers. So that's one of the things I think that we learned coming out is that we need to do better as an industry to go in and be like, we provide housing, and housing is one of the most important things that's going on here. And we want to continue to provide housing. You need to help us have regulations that can discount the cost of housing, that can continue to provide housing when it's not technically habitable, and all these things to relieve the industry so they don't have to have these 9 different conversations with 9 different lawyers to figure out what's happening. So
right, yeah. One of the things that I thought about just going through the calls, and it's just emergency action plans, EAPs. What company, what policy. Maybe some companies who are out in California who deal with wildfires, or companies who are in Florida who deal with hurricanes, who have certain things in place that we're able to have a company-wide policy to help some properties in that area. But I wonder about the things that we learned. I wonder about, obviously it's horrific, it's terrible, but what are some things that we did well? What are some things that some properties, some companies did well for their residents? And I think these are some things that you don't think about. You don't think about needing to go to the pool to get water to flush your toilet. That's not in anybody's plan. Housing, Bryan, like you just mentioned. I mean, if you can't take possession of your home, or if it's uninhabitable, what are some policies or procedures and things that need to be in place to help these residents? Because we're not the evil landlord. We're not in the business of kicking people out of their homes. We're in the business of providing homes. So did you think any good came out of this? Do you think any good as far as creating a policy for something like this?
Well, not yet, but give us time.
Yeah.
John and I have already talked a lot about some strategies of things that we want to put forward into a legislative agenda going into the future and stuff. So some simple things. So you talk about emergency plans. Your emergency plan is usually 24, 48, 72 hours, right?
It's
what
not
if
6 weeks.
Yeah. What if it's 3 weeks? Like, what do we do? This plan wasn't built for 3 weeks. And so, and other things of like, emergency housing situations. And one of the first things you ran into is like, some people, house gets crushed. They need to go find a place to live. They show up to an apartment and they're like, can we move in here? And they're like, no, we don't have running water and electricity. They're like, I don't care. We need shelter over our heads. And they're like, I don't know if we can legally rent you an uninhabitable. We're going to get in trouble down the road. What do we do? And so then they're waiting, right, to find the answer. So now what happens? Well, now the manager gets to a regional, the regional gets to a vice president talks to 4 lawyers, it comes back down. And so like, that's one of those things kind of like operationally, how do we want to provide the housing, but we also don't want to create an additional legal problem going down the road. So those are some of the things that they're asking us, like, what's the answer? We're like, I don't know. It's a really great question. So we're like, put that in the bucket. John, we're gonna go tackle that one in the future of like, emergency housing situations that we should be in a crisis thing where you're kind of relieved on that. The other thing is that in North Carolina, if you have a short-term lease, you're considered a hotel. So anything under 90 days, you have to pay real estate tax. Well, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, our company doesn't do anything short-term. It's like, well, I just need to get, and so it's like, we need to have some, crisis situations where it's not the typical market, but we're in here. And if you're in an emergency, that the county can flip the switch and say, let's look at this. And so we have a good list. I think we're going to be able to go through and get a good suggestion and look at this. And from a state of North Carolina to allow emergency procedures to be a little bit different. And then on the national piece going forward too, we got lucky that FEMA started changing some of its policies, but we didn't get that lucky because FEMA's changed the policies still aren't that great of changes. So we'll look at some of that stuff.
Yeah, I would add to what Bryan mentioned. I think that's the what can we do to give our members the flexibility they need to do what they need. But within that context, you still have, if you think about it, a lot of our members are multi-state, right? And every state has different laws. So if you're looking at your EAPs, how are you structuring your EAP? I mean, it's probably a question that I would imagine that management companies will need to start adding to their planning, which is, okay, if we have something like this in this particular state, what can we do? What can we not? What kind of questions do we need to address? Get their own general counsel to look at it and figure those things out. But there's the other thing that we're dealing with as well is, I think from a management perspective, I think a unique challenge is if an area is largely inaccessible for a certain amount of time, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and your employees have their own lives, right? Their own homes that they have to worry about, their own families that they have to worry about. Yeah. What kind of support can you give them? What kind of guidance can you give them so that they know what to do? We had a manager that she and her husband were cooking for the entire community on the community grills. And they were using their own money because, oh, by the way, what do you do when you have no electricity? And so you can't use credit and you must have cash and nobody has cash. And so they're going out of pocket themselves to go buy food for people and then cooking it for them. They did that because they're good people. And they did that because they are, it was the right thing to do. But as a company, how do you give your employees the guidance that they need to say, here's your decision tree. This is what you need to do. This is for yourself. You need to it's kind of like parents, right? You need to take care of yourself so you can take care of your children. Well, with this community, you are responsible for however many households and you're responsible for the asset, but you're also responsible for yourself and your own family. And I think, what is the priority for the management company to get people in as soon as physically possible, to get them in to provide the support for the on-site team? Because even if it's been only a week, only 5 or 6 days, that's a very long week that they've been there, and I would imagine that they are desperate to be pulled off the front lines and given a chance to catch their breath. So I think that's something that I don't know how many EAPs have that in there, but I would from the corporate level, I would strongly, after what we've seen, I would strongly suggest having some sort of plan for parachuting in people to help on the ground.
Yeah. We got lucky with when we did our first call. Somebody right before we got to talk mental health, and I can't remember who that was. And it was like, well, that's a really good point. And then we started reaching out and talking about that. And if you think about it, like the cell phones weren't working, so we called them 2-minute phone calls. If you got through to somebody, you got like 2 minutes, and then the call would drop. So you're not getting those communications. You're on site. You feel responsible for all the souls that are there. Okay. And then maybe your family lives across town, and you're trying to figure out how to get there. Your brother and sister or something has like a tree on their house. You got those things going on. You have this guilt of, you're tired. Everyone's looking to you for answers. You don't know anything else. And we had so many management companies in Nashville that just have one property in Nashville. So they headquartered in Atlanta, headquartered in, Virginia, Texas, Tennessee.
They were alone.
Right, and they had one property there, and it's like so. And then what the other thing that was happening is that like this kind of came out of nowhere. So like the Friday that it hit, it's like, oh my word. On Sunday is when the communication started getting out. On Monday, people are going, "What's going on?" Well, that's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Before people start reacting to it, and then it takes another week for the pictures to get out because the data couldn't be shared. And then so by the time you understand how severe it is, people have already been knee deep in it for like a week and a half. So I think that mental health piece is really where it's down. And even today, like now, we're at the great stage where people, they're exhaling, they're feeling better, we're going to get through this, and they're comfortable enough to start complaining, which is a great stage. It's the next stage. But then they start going to the manager and they start complaining about what's wrong with the property, what's going on with this and stuff like that. It's like, oh man, I'm just glad we got through this. So they're still carrying the weight of everyone and having to hear that. And then on the other side, this is the part that gets lost. People would show up with their families in their car and have all the possessions left, and they just got out. And they're like, we need a place to stay. And they're like, they hear those stories and the family breaks down of losing everything, and they're trying to find a place to stay, and they just don't know what to do, and they can't get them assigned. They don't know what the lease policy is. They can't communicate, and they carry all that guilt of sending that family away or putting them into an apartment and making that decision that they don't have the authority to make. And so that was really hard for them. So I think that the mental piece is something that we just don't really address and we don't really think about. It's that, buck it up and kind of toughen through it. But the reality is we're wiser now of how that impacts people.
Right. Seeing it firsthand. I mean, you can't not be impacted by it. I mean, I'm in Greenville, South Carolina. And so just down 26, and I've seen Asheville residents, Hendersonville residents at a grocery store, because one of the locations where FEMA started to send individuals for hotel, for housing, is just half mile up the street. And so I started seeing some people and hearing some stories just at local grocery stores. And it didn't affect me the way, like you said, I'm sitting in my air conditioner. I had running water. I lost power for a few days, but I got out of town. I went to Chattanooga to watch my brother do a race. And so I had an escape. There are a lot of people who didn't. And I could not imagine. It's just another one of those things that I didn't think about with, like you said, managers, maintenance workers, people who were showing up to work to help, to do whatever they could, and living through it themselves. They had no escape. It wasn't like they could necessarily go home to their air conditioning or their running water. They gave of themselves to help everyone else, and they went home to deal with the same thing that everyone else was in. And you mentioned mental health, Bryan, and John. We were talking about some resources that NAA has been able to provide during this. Has there been anything regarding? I know NAA does a mental health awareness month, and they have a ton of resources and webinars. But has anyone come out and offered any type of those types of services for the folks affected?
Yeah, well, one thing, one of the things I do want to point out, when all this hit, I was actually at an NAA event in Arizona, and with a lot of affiliates from around the country, something that NAA does every fall, and they made a point. The NAA, they being the NAA folks, made a point of approaching me saying, "Hey, we're anything you need," and they do have, based on their prior experiences with other events, they do have a natural disaster resource page, and they do have a mental health resource. And so they've offered up as much as they can. They've also tried to put us in touch with other affiliate associations that have dealt with disasters like this. So not a specific offer on say a specific mental health resource, for instance, but they're making sure that we know what is available out there, and they have made themselves available for helping us run down anything we might need to run down. Just by coincidence, we ANC, we're doing a mental health webinar in a couple of weeks. It was previously planned. So one of the things that we just said, well, look, I mean, that's an easy one. All the Western folks, let's make sure that they know it's there and available for them if they want it. That's a small thing, but I think one of the things that we're going to try to do, and this is just a continuation of what I think our role is and what I think AAWNC's role is, and that is, as we're identifying these needs, is going out and finding those resources. If we don't, we're not going to know about all of them off the top of our heads because it's new for us too, right? But we can act as a resource in the sense of doing the research and reaching out on behalf of the industry. And these calls help, because if one of our members happens to have a resource that they know about, they can share that information with the other folks, and that's the main value, quite frankly, of those calls, is to have that information sharing go back and forth.
Yeah. So NAA has been great. We were able to tap into the resources. It was interesting enough. NAA, one of the new requirements of the association is they want to create an emergency plan. And I'm like, okay, we're an association that has no property. We don't have any full-time employees. We don't really need this emergency, but I wrote it up, and it was, point number 1, if there's an emergency, call the state. Point number 2, call NAA. It was kind of figured out from there. First phone call I made was, second phone call I made was Linda with NAA, like, hey, give me help with this. And they got some resources. And so this short-term, long-term, and NAA is really going to help us show up on, like, how does an association run long-term during this? Where it's polite. What do you do? What are some things that happen? I mean, like, one of the great examples is, like, one of the resources they provide you just don't think about. But, like, we're in the middle of this crisis, and we're running an association, and that's the lowest. Managing and running the association is the lowest priority list on anyone's thing, right? But we have, like, our annual meeting coming up, and we're going to elect our board, and we're going to new positions and all this kind of stuff. And so it's like, how do we do this? And I was able to get with NAA and, like, hey, we want to suspend our bylaws, and they're like, here, this is great. Here's how you do it. Walk you through this, do this. And so they've helped us with that process of being able to run the association in a way where the association's not getting in the way, and allowing us to be a resource where the association is valuable. And I'm going to just plug associations right now if anyone's listening or not a member of an association, the resources that come together in a time like this were so much more valuable than not being inside the group. And so something simple, like, recently we had this call out, like, we need water. We just need more water. And so it was on a call. Company calls us up and says, hey, we got water we can deliver. So I go through that list of everyone that doesn't have water, call them and be like, do you need a water delivery to you? On call today, I'm like, hey, I got my pallet of water delivered today. That means tomorrow I don't have to drive to City Hall, put a whole bunch of things in my truck and deliver it to the property. And so properties that aren't members of the association, I mean, they're not being excluded, but you're also not included. So I'm not calling through those properties and asking, right, hey, because you're just not on our list. We don't have your number. We don't have your contact information. If they would call us and be like, hey, can we get in on that water delivery? Like, absolutely. You're part of the industry.
Right.
But, we're just not kind of in doing that. So and that's one of the things that I think that was able to build out. And then again, like, we're a member of the state association. Yep. And they're a great association to be members of, because what I'm able to do is lean back into John and be like, I need to tell your members this information about the mental health. So it goes from boss down to employee, where I'm going employee and they got to push it back up to the boss. Right. And so that really helped come from a couple different perspectives on that. So
good. So you mentioned water. But so from both of you, John from a state level, Bryan from a more localized level there in North Carolina, what do you need? What, MMN, we have 20 plus podcasters in our network. We cover multiple states. We're across the country. We have people who want you all to know that we don't want to forget. We want to help. So here's a chance for you to be very specific with your ask. What do you need? What can we do to help?
Well, I'm going to go
Bryan,
first.
you want to start? Go ahead.
I'm going to start with the basics. We need people to spend money, so people can make money, so they can pay their rent and they can stay in Asheville. I mean, that is one of the biggest needs right now, is that there is a concern from two perspectives. One is that the coolness of it, the uniqueness of Asheville is going to bleed away, and what kind of something you saw, like, happen with New Orleans, and it took a long time to build that back, right? And so there's that fear that that's going to happen. Then there's this other thing, like, if we lose a good number of these jobs, then the industry is going to be oversaturated with units. And then it's gonna create this whole trickle down effect. So we need jobs. So if you live in the general area, buy Asheville beer, buy things that that are produced out of Asheville, buy stuff that are there. If you're in the area and you can go to Western Carolina and visit and do something, and go eat at the restaurants and hang out and do something touristy-ish, it's open for business. You can go and spend money. So that would be a huge help. In that perspective going forward, just from the general, the people need to know their jobs are going to be there, the jobs are coming back, stuff like that, figuring that piece out. As for resources, potable water is going to be a big deal. The larger the jugs, the better. And if you know an organization that donates to that and works in those pieces, that would be helpful, of looking at some large donations that can be delivered. You can contact info@aawnc.org, or you can hit John up at info@online?
AANConline.org.
Yeah. So hit one of the info ats, and we can tell you where water can be delivered. As in everyday supplies, stuff like that, that's not a need anymore in the recovery piece, so much as the water is. And then, the support, just reaching out. If you know people that live out there, if you know people that are there, reach out, see how they're doing, talk to them, show them encouragement. I mean, that also plays a real big role. People are still tired. I mean, it's still kind of worn down. So.
Yeah, I'll go a little bigger picture for you. One of the things that we're dealing with at the state level is Bryan alluded to it, with we know there's going to be a long-term economic impact on the region. So a couple of things. Number one, it is a massive region geographically. It is a large. If you think of New England, Western North Carolina would make up a good chunk of New England. It's that big. So while some parts are still struggling in terms of being able to get there, other parts are wide open and they're open for business. And anything you can do to travel there and support the region, there are resources online you can look up and find out where you can go. So that's one. Number two, A big part of what AANC does, we do legislative work, and we work in legislative and regulatory. We work in Raleigh to try to do to represent the industry's best interests. And I can tell you that after the, we're recording this the day after the election. Our legislature will be back in session later this month. One last hurrah. And I think if you happen to know anybody in the legislature who works on staff in Raleigh, anybody with any kind of influence, let them know that in addition to rental assistance, unemployment assistance is going to be critically important for that region to keep people in place and to be able to pay their rent. So anything, it's a weird position to be in to say, hey, can you really advocate for rental assistance and for unemployment assistance? But I think that region's going to need it for the immediate future. Again, as we speak, we're coming up on, this will be the first full month that people have been without work. And it's going to be, I think we're going to start seeing some numbers coming out we're going to get a better idea of who can and cannot pay their rent. And so I think that assistance is going to be a very big deal going forward. So probably not what you're looking for, but in terms of help, but it's where the rubber hits the road, and
Yeah.
We have organizations that are out there that do rental assistance, but the scale that we're talking about, we need the government. We're going to need the government's help. I think we need the unemployment assistance in the short term will help businesses stay open so that when the potable water is back and the restaurants can reopen, that people actually have money to go out and shop and dine and do the things that will reinvigorate that economy and allow everybody to go back to their jobs and to pay their rent. And so that short-term assistance will lead to less need for long-term assistance, I think, is the way to look at it.
Yeah. No, you said it's probably not what I was looking for, but I want the truth, like I want your opinion, you're there. So, and all you can do is ask. All you can do is say what you need, and let the people listening take care of it from there. You've got to trust that what's that saying? The unmentioned, the unheard never get realized, or something like that. Just if you don't say it, nothing could ever come. So you've got to voice it. So just appreciate you being honest, and telling us what you need. And Bryan, to your point about getting people there to spend money locally, we from where I am, locally, I do get through social media and through emails, here are the cities that are open for business. Please come. Cherokee, I know being one of them, but there's some mixed things about telling telling some people to stay away, because we need these roads for emergency vehicles. We need these roads. We don't need them clogged with cars. But Asheville, Hendersonville, those types of places are they open? I mean,
yeah, the stay away time's over. So
okay.
If you can't visit Biltmore Village, but Biltmore is open if you want to go to Biltmore. Downtown Asheville is you gotta navigate a little bit, but there's little spots that here or there. Some of the breweries are still there and operating and doing that, and so Hendersonville downtown is open. So those places are. And so what you also have is the after effect. People are like, hey, I want to stay. I don't want to get in the way, right? Mm-hmm. And so a day trip is not getting in the way. Going to a football game at Boone, it's a great time to get up there and stuff. So it's I've been I've been to Boone, been Hendersonville, Asheville, travel around. Cherokee, everything is pretty much functional, and you can get around and visit those places and just go and check it out for a day or two. You may have a hard time finding a hotel, so like a weekend trip may be tough, but if you can pull off a day trip, that is definitely something that you should look at and consider.
Yeah. So, any, are there any organizations or any people specifically that you guys would just like to personally thank that have really, really sort of just stepped up in a big way to, to help, whether that's, provide staging or people or resources? Is there anybody that you guys would just like to thank?
Oh man, you could get me in trouble if I miss something. Well, definitely our sister associations, Upper State, Charlotte, Greensboro, Wilmington and Fayetteville and Raleigh. All the associations are located out of those cities. Everyone said, "What can we do to help?" And so the call, the ask was quick, and it was great. And I said, "Call John." No, but that was great. Hatching Hope, we talked a lot about them, and let me tell you, what's so great about them is they called and said, "Hey, we're coming," and I'm like, "Okay, what do I need to do?" They're like, "No, we're coming." I'm like, "Oh, that was wonderful." That was a great organization to work with, and then our supplier members. We talked about this water delivery. Chadwell Supply is the one that got the truck, and it just, it's like, hey, we got this truck and it's mislabeled water, and we want to get it to you guys. And so that we had so many people, smaller suppliers on the ground, were helping out. Manny and Brent and Daryl and just so many people that I would call me like, hey, I need to find a guy who can cut trees. And they're like, oh, let me get back to you. I need to figure out this. And so I also got to be nice to the government. I'll tell you, Congressman Tillis's office and Chuck Edwards' office were really helpful. What I'm like, we need a water map. And they're like, what? I'm like, I need a map that tells us where the stations are that produce the water and where they go. And they're like, this should be easy to get. I'm like, you would think so. I'm on day 4 trying to find this map. And so Tillis's office sent me this email that had the map. And I'm like, this is great. So thank you for that. So they also were really good at sharing information. So it was good. Again, calling them was one of those things. Oh, I should have done a week before, but doing that. And then the state disaster team was wonderful in answering a lot of questions. We had so many things you just didn't know how to handle, like how to get rid of mud. Yeah. Like, what do you mean? Like, we got 50 truckloads of mud. Where do we take them? I'm like,
toxic mud.
Toxic.
Yeah, that's the other word. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll add. So Chadwell also provided the staging area for Hatching Hope, and the Charlotte Association. They recruited a ton of volunteers to help Hatching Hope. Where they kind of take all the supplies and they create bags and they get everything organized. And so they're Bryan. I think Bryan hit all the ones I know of, and I'm going to be just as much trouble as he is for forgetting something I know. But I cannot stress enough how government can get a black eye sometimes, right? Government can get a pretty rough reputation. Everybody we dealt with was the only question they kept asking is, what do you need? What do you know? What can we do? They were coming through big time all the time. And those folks, all they want to do is help. That's all they wanted to do is help. And it was hugely beneficial to work with them. And, I have to say, part of me feels bad for them sometimes because, as like a logical human being, they'd be like, you would think I could do this, but you can tell that they're dealing with regulations and they're dealing with their own bureaucracy, and they have to play within those rules. And they did the best they could given some of their own constraints, and quite frankly, the scale of the problem they were dealing with. Especially early on, I know there was some weird information going around and some wild, rumors and that kind of stuff. I think that's going to happen when you have an information vacuum like we were dealing with out there.
Yeah.
I never saw any evidence of people doing anything other than the very best they could, and they were remarkable to work with. So I we all could have done things better, for sure, but I felt really good. I have felt really good coming out of this experience with all the organizations that we dealt with. Whether it's our, as Bryan mentioned, all of our associations, all people within the industry, all people that the government sent to help. They continue to send. I mean, it's not like they've left. They're still on the ground doing what they got to do.
Mm-hmm.
The folks up from the private sector, from the utility companies, everybody is doing the best they can. And you want to feel good about humanity. It's times like these that you really do.
It's the worst situations that typically, bring out the best, right? After every storm, there's a rainbow, or so it's really cool. Like I said it in one of I say it's really cool. I mean that just the humanity side. I said it in another podcast I was recording with someone else, that it's been pretty great to see. I'm not there, but it's been great to see the response. It's been great to see the human side of people coming out and dropping whatever they can to get there to help. And you mentioned Chadwell Supply. They're a sponsor of MMN, and I saw their staging area. I saw Hatching Hope. I'm trying to get Kelly on the podcast as well, because I'd love for her to have an opportunity to speak on what they're doing at a ground on the ground. And I didn't mean to put y'all on the spot, and I hope people watching and listening, if you didn't get mentioned, that's my fault. I'm sorry. Do not be mad at John and Bryan for missing you, or not giving you the attention that was on me. But it just I like to give credit where credit is due, and it seems like you guys have had a ton of help. The associations, but also from the people on the ground, from the multifamily industry.
Yeah, I think that's the important piece. I mean, John and I are just, we're just working with what we got. We're not on site. We're not doing this kind of stuff. My joke is I'm the little old lady who's plugging in and out the telephone wires and the communication piece. John's behind me helping out and doing other things, and we're tag team and stuff. So there's nothing that we're doing that is special or heroic or anything. We're just providing them their information and making that extra phone call and giving the information back. So the real stories are, and you probably should reach out to like the Hawthorns and the Pegasus and the management companies that the Fogelmans that are on site that have those stories about, the people who climbed up a tree to go take a lady and get her out of her apartment to drive her to the emergency, the people who put pizzas back in the car as soon as the day opened up and delivered pizzas to all the properties, people who threw guy shows up with 3 or 4 grills, delivers into the property so they can start grilling on site. I mean, those are the stories that aren't ours to tell, that we hear. But if you get those to share that, Greenville to Asheville are good sister cities. So, just the other side of the mountain. So I think it'd be fun to get those people on to hear their stories, probably the end of the year and some of the stuff that they did. So,
yeah, I really would love to get those West Virginia boys who came and put the road in from where was that? From is that Chimney Rock to Bear Mountain? Is that what that was?
Yeah.
The state and local officials are saying it would be a year, and it took them a week. They had some heavy machinery, and they just said, "Here, hold my beer." Let me hold my Asheville beer. Let me get this done for you real quick. I mean, those you're right. I mean, those are the kind of stories that I love. I want to hear. I want to hear all that stuff, but that's not why we're here today. But we talked about our industry. We talked about how much of a tight knit group we are, and how we're humanizing the evil landlord and the associations who are just there to grab money. But from this is the whole point of my podcast, or one of the initiatives that I have set forward, is to try to educate people and get people into our industry, because we are a great industry. You know, there's no denying that. I don't feel like our industry gets the credit it deserves. So from your perspective, John, from your perspective, Bryan, you all are not on site. But what would you say, and John, we'll start with you, but what would you say to somebody who says, John, you know, you're the executive director of an apartment association in North Carolina. Why would I want to join the multifamily housing industry? What would you have to say to them?
Well, so I usually focus on two things when I'm talking, especially when I'm talking to young folks who are, you know, maybe they're coming out of school, first looking at potential jobs, and they may not even be thinking career in their mind, and tell them that the multifamily industry is one of the few industries I know of that you have a really clear career track, even if you don't have a 4-year degree. And
Mm-hmm.
we're not talking just a job. We're talking a career. So that's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, name anything. It's hard to find anything more important than providing people with the shelter that they need to live their lives. And folks in this industry, that's what they do. They provide shelter for people. It's one of the fundamental needs that we all have. And if you're a community manager of a 200 or 300 or 400 unit community, you're essentially a mayor. And you often have more families living in your community than live in some towns around
Mm-hmm.
the state or around the country. So what you do is very important and has a great purpose. So finding a career that has that kind of purpose is not an everyday thing. So it's something that you can be really proud of. And so the combination of having a career that I think has a high purpose and there is an actual career track, make it a great industry to look at.
Yeah. Bryan?
Yeah, Billy, on that, I talked to a community manager, probably like a week, 2 weeks, half weekend, and she goes, you know, I decided yesterday that my job is really important, and I've been looking at other people and what they've been doing, you know, out there searching, moving trees, doing this kind of stuff. She goes, but I provide housing. You know, we're housing providers, and keeping people in their housing and getting people who don't have housing into housing and stuff like that. Because it's a really important role. And I sit down and told my staff, this is really, really hard. And I'm sorry this is hard and you're involved in this, but it's also really, really important. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes it gets lost that, you know, we think, oh, you're just a leasing agent. You're just, you know, a maintenance tech. You're just, and it's not. You're part of this larger, you know, greater human need of providing housing. And so I think that it's fulfilling in that aspect when you kind of embrace what it is. You've referenced the evil landlord mentioned a couple times. And, you know, as an industry, we swap that into housing provider, right? And really what it means is that, you know, you provide housing and we not only that, but we fight hard to make that housing good and quality and there. And I just don't think it's overly appreciated. And those that do the work and understand it, I think that there's value in that. So it's a career that if you're looking for value, I think that the multifamily industry provides value. And even if you're just on the supplier side, you know, just on the supplier side, you're supplying people who are providing housing. You're part of that supply chain for housing. So I think that was a really good perspective that was shared with me.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you both for that. I just it's just something I started doing, and so I'd like to close out every episode with that question, just because everyone has a different perspective. You know, we all got here. Excuse me. We all got here. We're all in the same industry, but all of us took different paths, and you know, it's really unique to hear the various perspectives on what the multifamily housing industry means to any one of us. My path was different than both of yours, and I would have answered that question a little differently, but I love how you did because it came from you. So thank you both for spending some time with me today to get the word out about how the associations were able to help the individuals affected by Hurricane Helene, and for being specific on your asks. And hopefully, we'll get the word out, and we can start. I don't say start. I mean, resources are there, but we can start maybe attacking things from a different level. Start going to the government to try to get some legislation passed and get some things out in front of some of our members who may be able to help with that. So again, thank you both for your time today. I am Mark Sharp with Multifamily Mixtape, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.